This floor is on lockdown. You don't have clearance to be here." The words, sharp and cold as the glass and steel cityscape framed behind him, were not aimed at an intruder or a corporate rival. They were aimed at Alara Vance. She stood motionless in the doorway of the penthouse office, her hands resting on the rubberized handle of her service cart. The scent of ozone and expensive, sterile air clung to the room, a world away from the faint, clean smell of lemon polish that followed her. Julian Croft, CEO of Croft Energy, didn't look at her when he spoke. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were fixed on the holographic display shimmering in the air before him, a grid of furious, unblinking faces from a dozen time zones. He was a man sculpted from pressure, his bespoke charcoal suit a second skin, his tie a perfect silk, not of defiance. But Alara saw the truth in the faint tremor in his hand, the one resting on the cold marble of his desk. He was a king losing his kingdom, and he was lashing out at the nearest, softest target. Alara's job was to be invisible, a ghost who polished away the smudges of power and emptied the waste bins of ambition. She was an expert in the art of disappearance, of becoming part of the architecture. But today, a miscommunication from scheduling had sent her here, to the 80th floor, the apex of the building and the epicenter of its crisis. In the far corner of the cavernous office, a small boy sat on a plush white rug that seemed to swallow him whole. This was Leo, Julian's son. He couldn't have been more than 7. While his father commanded a global empire on the brink of collapse, Leo was building his own silent world. He had a collection of smooth, gray stones, each one perfectly ordinary, and he was arranging them into a spiral on the floor. He worked with the intense, solemn focus of a master craftsman, his small face a mask of concentration. He was as invisible to his father as Alara was. Julian's voice sliced through the air again, this time directed at the screen. "Unacceptable. The indemnity clause is non-negotiable, and if your team can't grasp that, then this conversation is over." One of the faces on the screen flickered, a man speaking in rapid, agitated Vietnamese. Alara's mind, a quiet, orderly place she had cultivated over years of methodical work, caught the words. Not just the sounds, but the meaning, the nuance, the rising tide of insult that Julian's own translator was failing to convey. She saw the entire story in a single, devastating snapshot. A father who couldn't see his son, a CEO who couldn't hear his partners, a man so insulated by his own power that he was deaf, dumb, and blind to the world he claimed to command. Alara's protocol was clear: retreat, apologize for the intrusion she did not create, and vanish. She began to pull her cart back, the soft rubber wheels making no sound on the polished floor. She offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It was a gesture she had perfected, an admission of her place without a surrender of her dignity. She had been erased from rooms like this 1,000 times before, in her previous life, and now in this one. The sting of dismissal had long faded into a dull, familiar ache, a phantom limb of a past identity. The question was never if the dismissal would come, but how one chose to process it. Some people absorbed the bitterness until it poisoned them. Others learned to watch, to listen, to understand the mechanics of the machine that sought to grind them down. Alara had become a master mechanic. Would you endure this? The thought was not her own, but a faint echo from a different time, a different voice. Would you stand here, a ghost in a uniform, while a man breaks his own world and his own child, and pretend you see nothing? Julian made a sharp, cutting gesture with his hand, ending the call. The holographic display vanished, plunging the room into a heavy, ringing silence. For the first time, his gaze swept across the room and landed on his son. It was a blank, uncomprehending look, as if he were noticing a piece of furniture he'd forgotten he owned. "Leo," he said, his voice flat, exhausted. "Go to your room, now." The boy didn't look up. He carefully placed another gray stone, completing his spiral. The defiance was as silent and unmovable as the stones themselves. Julian's jaw tightened. He took a step toward the boy, his frustration coiling into something uglier. But before he could speak, his eyes flicked back to the doorway and found Alara, still there, a witness. His face hardened into a mask of pure, undiluted authority. "I said," he repeated, his voice dangerously low, You don't have clearance." This time, Alara didn't nod. She met his gaze for a single fleeting second. Her eyes were calm, clear, and held a depth he could not begin to fathom. In that 1 second, she wasn't the help. She was a mirror, and he did not like the reflection. She pulled her cart back into the corridor. The heavy glass door slid shut with a faint, final hiss, sealing the king and the prince in their cold, white tower. As she turned to leave, the faint, angry sound of Julian's voice, now directed at his small son, was swallowed by the thick, soundproof walls. She did not need to hear the words. She had already translated the silence. The 79th floor was a world of hushed efficiency, a stark contrast to the storm raging one level above. Here, the air was circulated with a gentle hum, and the light was a soft, forgiving white. Alara moved through the executive corridors with practiced ease, her cart a silent companion. Her new assignment was to detail the suites adjacent to the main boardroom, a task that required her to be a phantom, present but unseen. Through a slit in the frosted glass doors of the boardroom, she could see them. Julian Croft's executive team, a collection of sharp suits and sharper anxieties. They paced, they whispered into phones, they adjusted their ties as if straightening their armor. The energy bleeding from the room was acrid, the smell of fear mixed with overpriced cologne. A junior executive named Mark burst out of the room, his face flushed. He nearly collided with Alara's cart and recoiled as if he'd touched a hot stove. "Watch where you're going," he snapped, though she had been perfectly still. He paused, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, and noticed her. Or rather, he noticed her uniform. "We're in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar negotiation here," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The partners need to focus. We need to maintain a professional environment. Can you please stick to the service corridors until this is over?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned on his heel and strode down the hall, already pulling his phone to his ear. Alara stood there for a moment, the echo of his dismissal hanging in the air. A professional environment. An environment she was paid to create but not to inhabit. An environment where her presence was a stain, a distraction, a problem to be managed. How many times had she been told, in 100 different ways, that her very existence was unprofessional? How would you tolerate this, day after day? As she turned her cart, her gaze fell on a small credenza just outside the boardroom. On it sat a stack of documents, left there in haste. The top page was a draft of the contract, and on it, a line of Vietnamese text was circled in red ink. She recognized the phrase instantly. "Tay S letter, EA3N, TH letter 1EBF, CH letter 1EF5P. It was the source of the conflict, the lexical bomb that had detonated the entire negotiation. And beside it, scrawled in the margin, was the English translation provided by Croft's team, pledged assets. It wasn't wrong, but it was dangerously incomplete. It was the kind of translation a machine would generate, technically correct but culturally hollow. It implied a lack of trust, a demand for collateral from a partner who valued honor above all else. Her mind instantly supplied the better phrase, the one that conveyed partnership and mutual security. Her fingers twitched. The desire to pick up a pen to cross out the clumsy words and write the right ones was a physical urge, but she couldn't. Her uniform was a force field, repelling her from the world of consequence. Around her neck, the simple, gray lanyard felt heavy, a physical manifestation of the boundaries she was not allowed to cross. It carried her ID badge, Alara Vance, service staff, a label that erased every other identity she had ever held. She was a mop, a dust rag, a ghost, and ghosts couldn't rewrite contracts. The hours ticked by, each one a turn of the screw. The tension on the 79th floor became a palpable thing, a low-frequency hum of impending disaster. Alara continued her work, her movements economical and precise, but her senses were tuned to the boardroom. She heard the raised voices, the slamming of a fist on the long mahogany table, the final, fatal sound of chairs scraping back in unison. The frosted glass doors swung open. The Vietnamese delegation emerged, their faces grim, their movements stiff with offended dignity. They did not look at the Croft executives who trailed them, offering frantic, useless apologies. Their leader, a stern, older man named Mr. Tran, spoke a single, clipped sentence to his aide, and Alara's heart sank. He had called the deal dead and their partnership an insult. Julian Croft stood in the doorway, watching them go. His face was a mask of white-hot fury. He looked like a man who had just watched a skyscraper with his name on it crumble into dust. His team stood frozen, terrified to speak, terrified to even breathe. "Out," Julian snarled, his voice a low growl. "Every single one of you. Out of my sight." His team scattered like frightened birds. Julian stalked back into the boardroom, the doors swinging shut behind him. A moment later, a sound like a thunderclap echoed through the hall as something heavy and expensive chair, a piece of crystal, was thrown against the wall. The stakes were now brutally clear. This wasn't just a failed negotiation. It was a corporate catastrophe. The Green Energy Partnership was meant to be Croft Energy's future, its redemption from a history of fossil fuel controversies. Its collapse would crater the stock, invite shareholder revolts, and leave the company exposed and vulnerable. $1 billion gone. A future erased, all because of a single, misunderstood phrase. Alara stood alone in the silent corridor. She was the only person in the entire building who held the key, the simple linguistic shift that could mend the broken trust. But she was trapped on the wrong side of the wall, silenced by a uniform and a name badge. To step forward would be to break every rule, to invite scorn, disbelief, and immediate termination. To stay silent would be to watch a future she believed in, a future of cleaner energy, die because of one man's arrogant ignorance. The choice felt impossible. The system was designed to keep her in her place, to ensure her silence. What would you do when you have the answer but no one will let you speak? She looked down at her hands. They were the hands of a worker, clean and capable. They were also the hands of a scholar, a negotiator, a woman who had once commanded rooms like the one Julian Croft was currently destroying. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself remember what it felt like to have a voice. The administrative assistants at Croft Energy were the central nervous system of the company. They knew the schedules, the secrets, the coffee orders, and the tells of every executive. Alara knew that if she wanted to get a message through the corporate fortress, she couldn't storm the gates. She had to find a sympathetic nerve ending. She found one in Maya, a young assistant from the logistics department, sitting in a deserted break room on the 50th floor, looking pale and overwhelmed. Alara approached her not as a bearer of forbidden knowledge, but as a fellow worker. She offered her a bottle of water from her cart. "Long day," Alara said, her voice quiet. Maya gave a weak, grateful smile. "The longest. It's chaos up there. They're saying the Tran deal is dead. Everyone's panicking." Alara took a napkin from the dispenser. With a pen borrowed from her pocket, she wrote the two Vietnamese phrases side by side. Tai S letter 1 3 N, TH letter 1 EBF, CH letter 1 5P. Tai S letter 1 3 N, D stroke letter 1 3 M, B letter 1 3 O. She pushed the napkin toward Maya. "The first one is what we said. It's what a bank asks for. It says, 'I don't trust you, so give me your house keys.'" She pointed to the second phrase. "This one is what a partner says. It means a securing asset. It says, 'We are in this together, and this is my promise to you.'" Maya stared at the napkin. She didn't speak Vietnamese, but she could see the difference in the confident, elegant script, and she could hear the authority in Alara's voice. It was calm, precise, and utterly devoid of the panic infecting the rest of the building. How do you know this?" Maya whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. "I listen," Alara said simply. The translation was the problem. It was an issue of respect, not finance. Did you catch what she just did? It wasn't a boast or a display. It was a simple, clean transfer of critical data delivered with the efficiency of a battlefield medic applying a tourniquet. It was a glimpse of a skill so profound, so out of place in this context, that it completely recalibrated Maya's understanding of the woman standing before her. She was no longer looking at a member of the cleaning staff. She was looking at an expert. I have to tell someone," Maya stammered, grabbing the napkin as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "Be careful," Alara warned gently. "They're not looking for answers right now. They're looking for someone to blame." Maya nodded, her mind racing. She folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into her pocket. The seed had been planted. A small, improbable whisper of competence had breached the walls of assumption. It was a tiny victory, but in a war of attrition, even the smallest victories mattered. Her shift was supposed to end at 6, but the chaos had upended all schedules. Alara was tasked with a final sweep of the executive floor, now eerily quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wreckage of discarded coffee cups and shattered morale. As she passed the darkened conference room, she heard a small sound. She peered inside. There, under the massive mahogany table, was Leo. He had built a small fortress for himself out of discarded presentation binders. He was curled into a tight ball, his small shoulders shaking. He wasn't crying, it was a silent, convulsive grief. Alara didn't call out his name. She didn't approach with platitudes or false cheer. She knew that a wounded animal, even a small human one, startles easily. Instead, she quietly entered the room and sat on the floor, a few feet away from the table, her back against the cool wall. She didn't speak. She just sat, sharing the silence with him. After a few minutes, she began to hum. It was a low, steady melody, a wordless lullaby from a country thousands of miles and a lifetime away. It was a tune of quiet fields and patient rivers, a sound meant to soothe fevers and chase away nightmares. Slowly, the shaking subsided. A small, pale face peeked out from behind the binders. Leo's eyes, so like his father's, were red-rimmed and full of a sorrow too big for his small frame. He watched her, his gaze wary. Alara continued to hum, her own eyes soft and steady. If you were there, would you step closer or stay silent? Most people would have tried to coax him out, to fill the silence with noise. Alara knew that the silence was his only refuge. She was not there to invade it, only to stand guard at its perimeter. He crawled out from under the table. In his hand, he clutched one of his smooth, gray stones. He crept toward her, his movements hesitant, and placed the stone gently in her open palm. It was still warm from his hand. It was an offering, a treaty, a wordless expression of trust. Alara closed her hand around the stone, her humming never wavering. He sat beside her, leaning his head almost imperceptibly against her arm. They sat like that for a long time as the lights of the city began to glitter in the twilight outside. The next day, as Alara was clocking in, Leo appeared as if from nowhere. He was holding a single piece of bright blue embroidery thread. Without a word, he reached for the gray lanyard around her neck. His small fingers, surprisingly deft, tied the thread just above her ID badge. It was a tiny, vibrant slash of color against the drab, institutional gray. He gave the knot a final, satisfied pat, then turned and ran off before she could say a word. The thread was a secret, a silent acknowledgement of their shared language. The lanyard was no longer just a symbol of her role, it was now a symbol of her bond. The napkin was a spark, but Alara knew a spark wasn't enough to start a fire. She needed fuel. She needed to understand the root of the failure, the architecture of the ignorance that had led to this disaster. Her reassignment to the basement archives, intended as a punishment, became an opportunity. The archives were the company's memory, a climate-controlled crypt of forgotten projects and obsolete procedures. And in a dusty binder labeled International Vendor Protocols, 2018 present, she found it. It wasn't a conspiracy or a malicious plot. It was something far more common and far more dangerous, a stupid rule, born from arrogance and enshrined as policy. The protocol, implemented 3 years ago during a company-wide cost-cutting initiative, stipulated a new hybrid translation model. All initial drafts of foreign language contracts were to be processed through a low-bid AI translation service called LinguaFast. The output was then sent to a human translator, not for a full, culturally attuned translation, but for a simple grammatical review and formatting. The company was paying for a proofreader, but telling itself it was getting a translator. Alara felt a cold knot of anger in her stomach. This was the trap. The system itself was designed to fail. It prioritized a few $1,000s in savings over millions in potential profit and billions in goodwill. It was a process that treated language as a simple matter of code, of swapping one set of words for another, completely erasing the delicate, human tapestry of culture, history, and honor. The Vietnamese partners hadn't been insulted by a person. They had been insulted by a spreadsheet, by an algorithm that had stripped their words of all meaning. Have you seen a rule used like a weapon? This one was a razor blade, quietly slicing the heart out of every international relationship the company tried to build. It was a system that guaranteed a power imbalance, ensuring that Croft Energy's English language worldview was always the default, and any other language was just a garbled echo to be tidied up. She saw the path of the disaster clearly now. The Lingua Fast software had spat out the literal, clumsy translation of TAI S letter 3N TH letter 1 EBF CH letter 1 EF5P. The overworked, underpaid human translator, tasked only with checking for split infinitives and misplaced commas, had rubber stamped it. The legal team, monolingual and arrogant, had approved it. The failure wasn't a single person's fault. It was a feature, not a bug, and the only way to fix it was to expose the entire broken machine. She carefully photographed the relevant pages of the protocol manual with her phone. The napkin was the diagnosis. This was the evidence. Now she had to find a way to get the patient to listen. Maya, the administrative assistant, was brave. Armed with the napkin and her newfound conviction, she tried to escalate the information. She went to Mark, the junior executive, believing that logic and a clear solution would be welcomed in a crisis. She was wrong. Mark was in his office, his door ajar, barking at a subordinate. When Maya knocked, he looked at her with undisguised irritation. "What is it? I'm busy putting out fires." "I think I know what the fire is," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly. She held out the napkin. "It was the translation. The cleaning," she corrected herself. "A woman on the service staff, she's fluent in Vietnamese. She explained it. We used a term that was deeply insulting." Mark stared at the napkin, then at her, his expression shifting from irritation to disbelief, and then to contempt. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly, as if talking to a child. "The entire company is in freefall, our stock is about to tank, and your solution is a note you got from the cleaning lady." He let out a short, harsh laugh. "Get back to your desk, Maya, and stop listening to the help. They're here to clean, not to strategize." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning back to his computer, the napkin left forgotten on the edge of his desk. Maya retreated, her face burning with humiliation. The door had been slammed, not just on her, but on the truth. The system was pushing back. It wasn't just ignoring the solution, it was actively punishing those who tried to present it. The next morning, Alara was met at the time clock by a stern-faced HR manager. "Miss Vance," the manager said, her voice devoid of warmth, "there has been a report of you interfering in executive matters. Your engagement with administrative personnel is outside the scope of your duties." There was no trial, no questions, just a verdict. She was being officially reprimanded. A formal note would be placed in her file. Her duties were being changed, effective immediately. She was reassigned to the sub-level archives, indefinitely. It was a corporate burial. She was being isolated, cut off from the flow of information, banished to the building's concrete tomb. It was a clear message: you know too much. Stay silent, or the next door we close will be the one that leads to the street. That evening, in the silent, fluorescent-lit world of the archives, surrounded by the ghosts of dead deals and forgotten policies, Alara felt a wave of despair wash over her. Every official channel was blocked. Every attempt to help had been met with scorn and punishment. The system wasn't just broken, it was designed to protect its own brokenness. It was easier to punish the person who pointed out the crack than it was to fix the foundation. What would you sacrifice to stay true? Her job, her security, her quiet, invisible life. She sat on a stool, the cold, stale air pressing in on her. She could let it go. She could accept her punishment, keep her head down, and collect her paycheck. But then she thought of Leo and his silent pain. She thought of the green energy project and the cleaner world it promised. And she thought of the woman she used to be. That woman would not stay silent. That woman would find another door, or, if necessary, she would build one. In the tomb of the archives, Alara found her weapon. It wasn't a forgotten document or a secret ledger. It was an old, clunky service terminal in the corner, a relic from a bygone IT era, but it was connected to the internal network. It was a back door, left unguarded because no one of consequence ever came down here. She sat before the glowing green cursor, the silence of the basement a stark contrast to the storm in her mind. This was the point of no return. To send this message was an act of open rebellion. It was insubordination of the highest order, but it was also the only path left. She wasn't just fighting for a contract anymore. She was fighting for the very idea that competence should matter more than a title, that truth should matter more than hierarchy. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't writing as a member of the service staff. She was writing as the expert she was. The email was a masterpiece of concise, irrefutable logic. To Julian Croft at Croft Energy Com from E. Vance at Service Croft Energy Internal Subject. Your Vietnamese translation of TAI S letter on EA3N, TH letter 1 EBF, CH letter 1 EA5P VS. TAI S letter, EA3N D stroke letter 1 EA3M B letter 1 EA3 O Mr. Croft. The collapse of the Tran deal was not a failure of negotiation. It was a failure of translation, rooted in a systemic procedural flaw. The term your team used, TAI S letter 1 EA3N, TH letter 1 EBF, CH letter 1 EF5P, is technically pledged assets. But in the context of a partnership with Mr. Tran's conglomerate, it carries a deep cultural implication of distrust, akin to a pawnbroker demanding collateral. The correct term, TAI S letter, an EA3N D stroke letter 1 EA3M B letter 1 EA3 O, or securing asset, conveys mutual trust and shared risk. It honors the principle of partnership that is central to their business philosophy. This error is a direct result of the company's hybrid translation model, C Protocol 4.17b, which prioritizes cost-cutting over cultural accuracy. It is designed to produce this exact type of catastrophic failure. There may still be time to salvage this relationship, but only if the apology is as culturally intelligent as the insult was ignorant. Respectfully, Alara Vance, she didn't add her title. She didn't need to. She read it over once, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was everything. Her analysis, her knowledge, her quiet dignity, all distilled into a few powerful paragraphs. This is where everything could flip. She took a deep breath and clicked send. The email vanished from the screen, a digital arrow shot from the basement at the heart of the king. Now, all she could do was wait to see if it would be intercepted, ignored, or if, by some miracle, it would hit its mark. Less than 10 minutes later, a security guard appeared at the entrance to the archives. His face was a mixture of confusion and urgency. Alara Vance, Mr. Croft wants to see you, on the 80th floor. Now. The walk from the basement to the penthouse was a journey between worlds. She rode the express elevator, a ghost ascending to the heavens of corporate power. When the doors opened, Julian Croft's personal assistant was waiting, her expression unreadable. She led Alara to the boardroom. The scene was one of utter desolation. The remnants of the executive team were gathered, their faces ashen. At the head of the table, Julian sat like a man presiding over his own funeral. He had her email displayed on the giant screen at the end of the room. And at the other end of the table, patched in via a now stable video link, was Mr. Tran and his delegation. They had agreed to this final call out of a cold, formal courtesy, but their expressions were implacable. They were here to listen to Julian's final, groveling apology before severing ties for good. Julian's eyes locked onto Alara. He didn't ask her to sit. He simply gestured to the screen. "You wrote this," he stated, his voice flat. "Explain." This was the test, the proving ground. All eyes were on her, the scornful, disbelieving gazes of the executives, the cold, clinical stare of Julian Croft, and the weary, insulted eyes of the Vietnamese delegation. She was still in her simple, gray uniform. She was out of place, a disruption in the natural order of things. Alara took a step forward. She ignored the Americans. She looked directly into the camera, meeting Mr. Tran's gaze. And then she began to speak, her Vietnamese flowing not like a second language but like a mother tongue. It was formal, respectful, and imbued with a deep, nuanced understanding that the previous translator had so painfully lacked. Kin Chao Ong T R letter 1E7N. Toi La Alara Vance. Toi Zin D stroke letter 1B0 letter 1E3 C Tham letter B7T Cho S letter EF1 THI letter 1 EBF U Sot Sao S letter EFC Trong Jio TI letter 1 EBF PC letter 1 EE7 A Chung Toy. Greetings, Mr. Tran. My name is Alara Vance. I wish to apologize for the profound failure in our communication. She didn't just translate words, she translated intent. She explained that the offensive term was the product of a flawed, impersonal system, not a reflection of Croft Energy's respect for his company. She called it, in his own language, a deafness of the heart. She articulated the principle of TAI, S letter 1 EA3N D stroke letter 1 EA3M B letter 1 EA3O not just as a legal term, but as a philosophical cornerstone of their shared venture. The air in the room shifted. The contempt on the executives' faces melted into slack-jawed astonishment. Julian Croft leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, watching not Alara but Mr. Tran. The older man's stony expression was softening. He was listening, truly listening for the first time. He asked a sharp, technical question about liability allocation. Alara answered it instantly, demonstrating a fluent grasp of both international contract law and Vietnamese corporate ethics. After a long, tense silence that stretched for an eternity, Mr. Tran spoke. He directed his words to Alara. Ko Kong PH letter 1 E3 I La M letter 1 E 9 T NG letter 1 B 0 letter 1 E D D I Fearn D letter 1 E C BCH. Ko La M letter 1 E 9 T N Ha NG O letter 1 E A 1 I Jio. Ko La AI. You are not a translator. You are a diplomat. Who are you? Did you feel that shift? The power in the room had just tilted on its axis. It no longer resided at the head of the table with the man in the $1,000 suit. It stood in the center of the room, with the woman in the simple gray uniform. The deal was no longer dead. It was breathing again. And Alara Vance was the one who had just given it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. In the hours that followed, the world realigned itself. The deal was salvaged in a flurry of late-night calls, with Alara acting as the bridge of understanding between the two parties. By dawn, the contracts were amended, the apologies were accepted, and the partnership was reborn, stronger and more respectful than before. The boardroom was now a scene of exhausted relief. The executives who had scorned her now looked at her with a mixture of fear and awe. She was an anomaly they could not process, a woman who had emerged from the shadows to save them from themselves. Julian Croft called her into his private office. The morning sun streamed through the vast windows, illuminating the lingering ghosts of his fury. He looked tired, but something in his eyes had changed. The arrogance had been fractured, replaced by a grudging, astonished respect. "I've already fired the head of the legal department and the translation contractor," he said bluntly. "Mark is being reassigned to the Anchorage office." It was a corporate execution. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, the first time he had ever acknowledged her as someone who should sit in his presence. "I've reviewed your file. There's nothing in it. No previous employment, no education history. It's a blank slate, yet you speak Vietnamese like a native and understand contract law better than my entire team." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the marble desk. "I'm offering you a position. Senior Vice President, Global Strategy and Communications. You'll report directly to me. Name your salary, 6 figures, 7, whatever you want. The job is yours." It was the ultimate prize. A meteoric rise from the service corridor to the C-suite. It was everything the system valued: money, title, power. Alara looked at him, her expression calm. She thought of the flawed protocol in the archives, of Maya's humiliation, of a corporate culture so broken that it had to be rescued by its most invisible employee. Giving her a title wouldn't fix that. It would just be another patch on a rotten foundation. "Thank you, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice even, "but I must decline." Julian was stunned into silence. "A new title for me doesn't fix the system that made me invisible to you for 2 years, she continued. "Putting me in an office on this floor doesn't help the person with my skills who will be hired into the mailroom tomorrow. I don't want a promotion. I want a new policy. What does real justice look like here? It wasn't about revenge or personal gain. It was about ensuring this could never happen again. I want you to create a program," she said, her voice gaining strength. "A company-wide, systemic protocol. We'll call it the Dignity Protocol. A full audit of the hidden skills of every single employee in this company, from the janitors to the security guards to the cafeteria workers. We create a database. We create pathways for those skills to be seen, utilized, and rewarded. We train our management to see people not for the uniform they wear, but for the talent they possess. We tear down the wall between the service floors and the executive floors. She stood up. That's my offer. I won't be your vice president, but I will be the first consultant you hire to build that program. Julian Croft, a man who had never been so thoroughly outmaneuvered in his life, could only stare at her. She wasn't just demanding a job, she was demanding that he change the soul of his company. 6 months later, the Dignity Protocol was not just a proposal, it was a living, breathing part of Croft Energy's corporate DNA. It was a testament to the fact that real change, when demanded with unshakable conviction, can be achieved. The program was comprehensive. Its centerpiece was a new digital platform integrated into the employee HR system. Upon hiring and during annual reviews, every employee was prompted to complete a skills and talents audit. It went far beyond their job description, asking about language fluencies, past degrees, technical certifications, even volunteer experience and creative skills. The data didn't just sit in a file, it was actively scanned by a dedicated internal mobility team. Alara, as the lead consultant on a lucrative contract, had overseen its implementation. She ensured the program had teeth. Department heads were now required, as part of their performance reviews, to show how they were utilizing the hidden talents within their own teams. A new policy, internal first, mandated that any new position must be cross-referenced with the Dignity Protocol database before being advertised externally. The results were transformative. A night shift security guard with a dormant accounting degree was moved into the finance department. A cafeteria worker who was a certified graphic designer in her home country was now designing internal marketing materials. The company even discovered a janitor on the Tulsa campus who was a published poet. He was now running voluntary workshops on effective communication for junior managers. Would this change be enough in your workplace? It wasn't a perfect system, and there was still resistance from some old guard managers. But it was a start. It was a formal, named, and enforced acknowledgement that human potential could not be defined by a job title. Alara was leading a training session for new managers in a redesigned conference room. The room was bright, open, and collaborative, a physical manifestation of the new corporate culture. She was no longer a consultant hiding in the archives. She was the architect of the company's new ethos. Her quiet authority filled the room. She was teaching them how to see the unseen, how to listen to the silenced. The change wasn't just a PDF in a policy manual. It was happening, one conversation, one promotion, one act of recognition at a time. The path was open. Julian Croft had started coming home earlier. The salvage deal had stabilized the company, and the quiet success of the Dignity Protocol had begun to repair its fractured culture. But the biggest change was not in his balance sheets. It was in his house. One Tuesday afternoon, he walked through the back door into the garden. The manicured, sterile perfection that his expensive landscaping crew maintained was gone. In its place was a small, thriving vegetable patch, and in the middle of it were Alara and Leo. Alara was showing Leo how to gently tie a tomato plant to a stake. She wasn't an employee anymore, not in the traditional sense. After launching the protocol, she had agreed to a unique arrangement. She would work with Leo a few hours a week, not as a nanny or a tutor, but as a quiet companion, a steady presence in his turbulent world. Leo, who for years had moved through his own home like a little ghost, was covered in dirt and smiling. As Julian watched from the doorway, hidden by the shadows, Alara whispered something to the boy. Leo looked at a fat, wobbly bumblebee buzzing around a tomato blossom, and he let out a laugh. It was not a small, hesitant chuckle. It was a full, free, joyous sound that filled the garden. It was the sound of a child who felt safe. It was a sound Julian hadn't heard in years, a sound he had forgotten his own son could make. The sound hit him with the force of a physical blow. All his money, all his power, all the specialists and therapists he had hired, and none of them had been able to produce that sound. But this woman, with her quiet patience and her steady, humming presence, had found a way through his son's walls. She hadn't used words or theories. She had used simple, human connection, whose voice helped you heal when no one clapped. Julian realized with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity that while Alara was fixing his company, she had also been quietly healing his family. He had been so focused on the billion-dollar deal she had saved that he had failed to see the priceless treasure she was restoring right here, in his own backyard. He had seen her competence, her brilliance, her strength. But he had never truly seen her grace. Until now. That evening, after Leo was asleep, Julian found Alara in the kitchen, washing the garden dirt from her hands. The air was filled with the scent of fresh mint and damp earth. For a moment, he simply watched her, this woman who had so profoundly and quietly upended his world. There was no big, theatrical apology. The man who had once dismissed her with a single, arrogant sentence was gone. In his place was someone more sober, more humble. "His teachers called today," Julian began, his voice quiet. "They said he participated in a group activity for the first time. He showed another student how to draw a spiral. He's better. With you." Alara finished washing her hands and turned, her gaze steady. She simply listened, allowing him the space to find his words. "This arrangement," Julian continued, gesturing vaguely to the house around them. "It's not enough, it's not right, I want to formalize it, but I don't know what to call it. You're not staff. You're not a tutor." He paused, struggling. "I want you to be the director of the Croft Family Foundation, not the public-facing side, the private side, the part that's supposed to take care of us. I want you to manage Leo's education, his well-being, his future. You will have full autonomy, you will set the terms, you will tell me what he needs, and you will tell me what I need to do." Recognition done right, agree. It was more than a job offer. It was a surrender. It was a complete abdication of his own failed authority as a parent and an admission that she, the woman he had once seen as less than nothing, possessed a wisdom he desperately needed. He wasn't giving her a title to make himself feel better. He was ceding power because he had finally recognized where the true expertise lay. He was asking her to teach him how to be a father. "I will help Leo," Alara said finally, "and I will help you learn how to listen to him. Those are my terms." Julian nodded, a look of profound, exhausted relief on his face. A door had been opened, not for an employee but for a healer. A year had passed. Croft Energy was a different company. The story of the janitor who saved the Tran deal had become a piece of corporate folklore, a founding myth for the new culture. Alara was walking through the newly opened Employee Wellness Center on the 30th floor. The center, a direct result of proposals that had come through the Dignity Protocol, was a bright, airy space with a quiet room for meditation, a small library, and subsidized childcare. It was a space built on the principle of caring for the whole person, not just the worker. She saw a young woman from the mailroom, someone she recognized from her early days. The woman was showing her supervisor her profile on the Dignity Protocol platform, her face glowing with pride. She had just been accepted into a company-sponsored program to get her logistics management certification. Alara smiled. This was the machine working as it should. This was the legacy. She was dressed in a simple but elegant linen pantsuit, the uniform of a respected consultant. But around her neck, she still wore a lanyard. It was the one issued to the leadership team of the protocol, a sleek, dark blue band with the program's logo, an abstract image of an opening door. But tied around the blue fabric, just above her new high authority ID badge, was a small, bright piece of blue embroidery thread. It was slightly faded now, but it was still there. Leo had retied it for her a few days ago, a silent reaffirmation of their bond. Did the object's meaning change for you too? The lanyard was no longer a symbol of servitude or invisibility. The institutional gray had been replaced by a confident blue, but the personal, human touch of the thread remained. It was a perfect, physical metaphor for who she had become, a woman who could command a boardroom and heal a child, a leader whose authority was interwoven with her humanity. It was a symbol not of what she did, but of who she was. She was ready for whatever came next. The final scene is not in a boardroom, but in a classroom. Alara is leading the capstone session for the first graduating class of Croft Energy's new Ascend mentorship program, an initiative she designed as part of the Dignity Protocol. The room is filled with a diverse group of employees, former security guards, cafeteria workers, and administrative assistants, all of whom are now on track for management positions. Their faces are bright with hope and a sense of earned belonging. On the screen behind her is the protocol's motto, "Talent is everywhere. Opportunity is not." In the back of the room, sitting not as a CEO but as a student, is Julian Croft. He is listening intently, taking notes. On the table in front of him, next to his expensive tablet and leather-bound notebook, sits a single smooth gray stone. It's his reminder, a small, ordinary object to keep him grounded in an extraordinary truth. A young man in the front row, a former maintenance worker who will be starting a new role in the engineering department next month, raises his hand. "Miss Vance," he says, his voice clear and confident. "What's the most important part of the protocol, if you had to boil it down to one thing?" Alara smiles, a warm, genuine expression that lights up her entire face. "That's simple," she says. "It's learning to see the person right in front of you, truly see them. Everything else follows from that." The room is still. Dignity has been restored. The future is being rewritten, not by a single hero, but by a system that has finally learned to see its own people. What does it take to truly change a room? Sometimes it takes the one person everyone else tried to make invisible.